Hi all, welcome back to our SQL tutorial series. Today we are going to discuss about the aggregate functions in SQL. Let's get started with the basics. What are aggregate functions, you will ask? Well, they are powerful tools in SQL that allow us to perform calculations on group of rows to return a single result. Think of them as your SQL superpowers for summarizing data. SQL is excellent at aggregating data. You will use aggregate functions all the time, especially with the group by commands. So it is important to get comfortable with them. The functions themselves are the same ones you will find in Excel or any other analytics programming language such as SAS or Python. So here is a quick rundown of some commonly used aggregated functions. First one is count. It counts the number of the rows or columns. Count distinct. It counts the distinct number of values in column. Whereas sum calculate the sum of values in a column. Whereas average, it will calculate the average of values in a column. Min, it will calculate the minimum value in a column. And max will calculate the maximum value in a column. Now let's see these functions in action with some examples. But before that, let's look at our dataset which we are going to work on. The dataset which we are going to work on is a transaction dataset. In this dataset, you can find out all the information regarding the customer, that what product they have purchased, on what date they have purchased, and what has been the ship date, and all the other attributes associated with the transaction they have made on a particular date. So you can see this is the dataset which we are going to work on. As I said, count is a SQL aggregate function for counting the number of rows in a dataset or in a particular column. One nice thing about the count function is that you can use it on non-numerical columns too. Let's do an example. Select count star from orders. Let's run the code. You can see that the results showed the count of all rows to be 9,994. Things start to get a little bit tricky when you want to count individual columns. And the reason is, if a column has a null values, count is going to give you the records for only the non-null values only. That is one thing you need to remember. In our dataset, we do not have any null values, so it is going to give you all the number of records. But let's say if you have null values, it would have given you the less number of records because it is not going to count the null values. Let's do an example with our categorical column customer underscore name from orders table. Since we do not have any null values in customer underscore name column, it has given us the same number of records which are in the dataset, that is 9,994. Count distinct is a handy aggregate function if you want to count the number of the unique values in a categorical or numerical column. Let's do an example and see how count distinct works. Select count distinct city from orders table. So there are 531 cities where you can assume that particular company has been providing services in 531 cities. If in the dataset for this particular column, city column, if there are any null values, then count distinct would have ignored those null values and given you the less number of the records. So that is one caveat you have to remember when you are using count or count distinct with a particular column if it has null values. Now let's discuss about the sum function in SQL. Sum is a SQL aggregate function that total values in a given column. Unlike count, you can only use sum on column containing numerical values. Let's see an example. Select sum sales. Let us calculate the profit also from orders, and let's run the code. Now you can see here the total sales value is 2.29 million, whereas the total profit is $283,397 and some cents. An important thing to remember that aggregators only aggregate vertically. If you want to perform a calculation across rows, you will do this with simple arithmetic. Moreover, you do not need to worry as much about the presence of nulls with sum as you would do with count, as sum treats nulls as zeros. Min and max are SQL aggregate functions that returns the lowest and highest value in a particular column. They are similar to count in that they can be used on non-numerical columns also. Depending upon the column type, min will return the lowest number, earliest date, or non-numerical values as close alphabetically to A as possible. As you might expect, max does the opposite. It returns the highest number, the latest date, or the non-numerical value closest alphabetically to Z. Let's do an example. Select min sales as min underscore sales, max sales as max underscore sales from orders. Let's run the code, and you can see the lowest transaction value is $0.4439, whereas the highest transaction value is $22,638.48. Now let's discuss about average. Average is a SQL aggregate function that calculates the average of a selected group of values. It is very useful but has some limitation. First, it can only be used on numerical column. Second, it ignores nulls values completely. Let's do an example. Select average sales as average underscore sales, comma, average profit as average underscore profit from orders. Let's run the code. So average sales value is $229.85, whereas the average profit is $28.65. And there you have it. I hope you find this tutorial helpful. Don't forget to practice what you have learned and stay tuned for more SQL tips and tricks. Thanks and have a great day.